Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at something
Okay.
that I think we all do,
Yeah.
but maybe don't think about as much as we should, and that is all the nonverbal communication that
Right.
happens when we're interacting with people.
Yeah.
So all the stuff
Yes.
that isn't the words that we're saying.
Right.
And we're going to be doing that by looking at a book called How to Read a Person. Like a book by Gerard Nierenberg.
Yes, a classic.
A classic.
And I was thinking about this the other day because I was in a meeting, and you know those meetings where everyone's like nodding and smiling,
Oh, yeah.
but you can kind of feel like what they're saying
Yeah.
doesn't match up
Yeah.
with what their body's doing.
With their body language, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable how attuned we are
Yeah.
to those sorts of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And Nierenberg kicks this book off with this idea of gesture clusters.
Which I think is so important, and that is that we're not just looking at an individual gesture in isolation. That would be like trying to understand a word without the entire sentence around it.
Right, like if someone crosses their arms, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're closed off.
Right.
Maybe they're just cold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're looking for groups of gestures, these clusters of gestures that kind of work together to tell a story.
Right.
And then we need to think about that in the context of what the situation is.
Okay, so like let's say you're in like a sales meeting.
Yeah.
And the client crosses their arms while you're talking.
Okay.
But they're also like leaning forward and nodding thoughtfully.
Right.
That's totally different than if they're crossed arms and leaning back and frowning.
Exactly. And it's these nuances, these subtle variations that can totally change the meaning of a gesture.
Yeah.
One of the most fundamental contrasts, I think, that Nierenberg explores is this idea of openness versus defensiveness. Open gestures like showing your palms or unbuttoning your coat signal a willingness to connect, to be receptive.
Right.
On the other hand, you have closed-off postures like crossed arms, which can indicate resistance or discomfort.
It's funny how, like, instinctively, we understand this stuff, even if we don't realize it.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't go up to someone
Right.
with your arms crossed if you wanted to make a good first impression.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that research has shown that even the position of the crossed arms can make a difference.
Okay.
So holding your arms high and tight across your chest suggests stronger defensiveness.
Okay.
But if they're just holding their elbows or crossing their arms lower down, that could just indicate they're feeling a bit thoughtful or even maybe self-soothing.
So even like seemingly simple gestures can have
hidden depths.
Hidden depths. Yeah. Okay. I have a question about something else that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Which is these evaluation signals.
Right.
So how can we tell when someone is like actually considering what we're saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these evaluation signals are like little windows into someone's thought process. And a tilted head.
Right.
A hand on the cheek or stroking the chin.
Yeah.
All of those can indicate that someone is really actively listening.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
The classic thinker statue
Oh, yeah.
totally nails that pose.
That's a great visual.
Yes.
Head tilted,
Yeah.
hand on the chin,
Deep in thought.
deep in thought. Yeah.
And for me,
Yeah.
being able to see those signals like in real time would be
Can be incredibly valuable.
so valuable.
Like imagine you're giving a presentation and you see several people in the audience doing those evaluation gestures.
Okay.
That tells you you've got their attention.
Yeah.
And you can kind of tailor your approach accordingly.
It's like getting feedback on how your message is landing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Instant feedback.
Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also want to talk about the trickier stuff.
Okay.
Like, how do we navigate those gestures that might signal suspicion or deception?
Right.
Yeah. He mentions covering the mouth or touching the nose
Right.
as like potential red flags, but I know it's not as simple as that.
You're absolutely right. Context is key.
Right.
We can't just assume someone's lying because they touch their nose. Maybe they have a cold or they're just self-conscious about a blemish or something.
Right. Like you said before, it's about like observing those clusters of gestures and looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
So if someone's like repeatedly covering their mouth while denying something or seems evasive, then that might warrant further observation.
Right.
But we can't jump to conclusions based on one single gesture.
Exactly. It's like being a detective.
Right.
Looking for clues and piecing together the whole story.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that nonverbal communication is just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
Speaking of piecing things together,
Yeah.
I'm curious about the gestures
Uh-huh.
that project confidence.
Right.
I'm always looking for ways to boost my self-assurance, especially in like those high-pressure situations.
Sure.
So what are some of the tips
Yeah.
from Nierenberg on this?
Well, one gesture that he highlights is steepling,
Okay.
where you touch your fingertips together, and it often signals confidence and can even convey subtle messages about perceived status or dominance.
Wait, so the height of the steeple matters too?
Exactly. So
Okay.
higher steepling, especially near the face,
Okay.
often suggests more assertiveness or even a sense of superiority.
Got it.
Lower steepling, on the other hand,
Uh-huh.
might convey a more thoughtful or less dominant approach.
Okay, so if I'm trying to like project confidence in a meeting,
Yeah.
I might want to try steepling
You might want to experiment with that.
a little bit higher.
A little bit higher. Yeah. But the key is to be authentic.
Right.
And to use gestures that feel natural to you.
Right.
Because forced or unnatural gestures can actually have the opposite effect and undermine your message.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, what about those times when we're feeling nervous or anxious? What are some of the telltale signs that our bodies might be betraying our cool?
Yeah. Well, those nervous habits that we all have, fidgeting or throat clearing or even nail biting,
Oh, yeah.
they often become more pronounced
Yeah.
when we're feeling anxious.
Oh, yeah. I totally do the throat clearing thing when I'm nervous.
Mm-hmm.
I never even realized it until someone pointed it out to me.
Right.
It's so interesting how these things can be happening right under our noses,
Mm.
and we're completely oblivious.
Absolutely. But, recognizing these signs in ourselves and others can actually be really helpful.
Uh-huh.
Like if you're in a meeting and you see someone fidgeting,
Right.
it doesn't necessarily mean they're bored or disinterested.
Right.
They might just be nervous.
That's a good point. It's like instead of judging someone for their nervous habits, we can try to understand where they're coming from
Right.
and maybe even offer some support.
Exactly. And if we're aware of our own nervous habits, we can try to manage them in a way that doesn't undermine our message.
Okay.
Maybe take some deep breaths, focus on maintaining a steady posture, or even find a discreet way to channel that nervous energy, like squeezing a stress ball or something.
Okay. It's a great advice.
Yeah.
One thing I found really interesting in the book was Nierenberg's discussion of how nonverbal communication can reveal a lot about the dynamics between couples.
Yes.
Um,
He points out that couples who have a strong bond often have unique gesture clusters that reflect that connection.
yeah.
For example, touch is such a powerful indicator of intimacy and affection.
You see it all the time, right?
Yes.
Couples holding hands or leaning into each other.
Yeah.
Maybe a gentle touch on the arm or shoulder. It's like they've created their own little world, completely oblivious to everyone else around them.
Exactly. And there's also this phenomenon called mirroring, where couples subconsciously mimic each other's gestures and postures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's like their bodies are in sync,
Uh-huh.
reflecting that emotional connection.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that these nonverbal cues can often reveal more about the state of a relationship than words ever could.
It's like a secret language
Yeah.
that only they understand.
Right.
But even if we're not part of that couple,
Right.
we can still pick up on those vibes and get a sense of their connection.
Absolutely. And speaking of dynamics, Nierenberg also dives into how nonverbal communication plays a crucial role in relationships between superiors and subordinates.
Okay.
He talks about how gestures related to dominance and submission can often be observed in these interactions.
So like a superior might steeple high,
Yes.
lean back in their chair,
Right.
or even put their feet up on the desk.
Exactly.
Those are all pretty clear signals of authority.
Right. And on the other side, a subordinate might not frequently avoid direct eye contact or keep their arms close to their body, gestures that can signal deference or even a bit of nervousness.
It makes you wonder, though, if these gestures are always about a conscious power play.
Right.
Like, could they also just reflect the natural dynamics that often emerge in hierarchical relationships?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Nierenberg seems to suggest that it's often a combination of factors.
Okay.
Sometimes these gestures are intentional,
Right.
but other times they're simply a reflection of the unspoken rules and expectations that govern these types of relationships.
It's like we're all playing our parts in this intricate dance of nonverbal communication, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. And this dance can get even more interesting when we look at specific settings, like a courtroom, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Nierenberg has a whole section on how nonverbal communication plays a crucial role in legal proceedings.
Oh, yeah. I was fascinated by that part of the book. He He talks about how lawyers often use nonverbal cues to influence juries,
Right.
whether it's through confident postures or dramatic hand gestures or even carefully calibrated eye contact.
It's like they're trying to create a whole performance using their bodies as well as their words to persuade the jury.
Right. And then you have the witnesses
Yes.
who might be struggling to control their nerves or even trying to hide their deception.
Right.
And Nierenberg points out that those subtle signs of anxiety or dishonesty can often be picked up on by the jury,
Yes.
even if they're not consciously aware of it.
Exactly. And it's not just the lawyers and witnesses.
Right.
Even the judge, despite their efforts to remain impartial, can unintentionally reveal their opinions or biases through subtle gestures or facial expressions.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's like everyone in that courtroom is part of this nonverbal drama,
Right.
sending and receiving signals that can have a huge impact on the outcome of the case.
It really highlights how pervasive and influential these unspoken signals can be.
You know, it's funny. We've been talking about all these different scenarios where we can see people's body language.
Yeah.
But what about those situations where we can't?
Okay.
Like when we're talking on the phone,
Right.
does nonverbal communication even play a role then?
That's a great point. And you might be surprised to learn that even when we can't see the other person,
Really?
we're still engaging in a rich tapestry of nonverbal communication.
But how?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
Our tone of voice, our pacing,
Yeah.
even the way we handle the phone, all of these things can convey a wealth of information about our emotions and intentions.
Oh, yeah. You can totally tell when someone's not really listening on the phone.
Right.
Like they might get really quiet or their tone will get flat
Uh-huh.
or they'll start fiddling with something while they're talking.
Exactly. Their nonverbal cues, even over the phone, are betraying their feelings,
Wow.
even if they're trying to mask them with their words.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's like our voices become our bodies in those situations, conveying all those subtle messages that we might not even be aware of.
Precisely. And Nierenberg even suggests that we might subconsciously make gestures while we're talking on the phone, even though the other person can't see us.
Really?
Yeah.
So like we might nod our heads or shrug our shoulders, even though no one is watching?
It sounds strange, but research suggests that it might actually happen.
Wow.
It just goes to show how deeply ingrained nonverbal communication is in our interactions.
It's like we can't escape it.
Right.
Even when we're just talking on the phone, our bodies are still part of the conversation.
It really highlights that interconnectedness of our communication.
Yeah.
Our words, our voices, our bodies, they're all working together to convey meaning, whether we're conscious of it or not.
So this whole deep dive has really opened my eyes to this hidden world of nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see these gestures and cues everywhere now.
That's the first step, becoming more aware. But now the key is to figure out how to apply this knowledge in a way that helps us communicate more effectively and build stronger relationships.
You know, I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Nierenberg talks about how understanding nonverbal communication can be especially valuable in the business world.
Absolutely.
Like imagine being able to read your clients or colleagues and anticipate their needs or concerns. That would be huge.
Absolutely. Being able to pick up on those subtle cues can help you close deals, build rapport, and even navigate those tricky negotiations.
And in our personal lives, being more attuned to nonverbal communication can deepen our connections with loved ones, help us resolve conflicts more effectively, and even make us better judges of character.
It's about becoming more sensitive to the full spectrum of human communication.
Right.
Not just the words people are saying, but also the unspoken messages they're sending through their bodies.
So now that we're aware of all these nonverbal cues, what are some practical tips for incorporating this knowledge into our daily lives? What can we do to become better observers and interpreters of this silent language?
Yeah, it feels like we've uncovered this secret code, but now we need to figure out how to crack it.
Right.
Like, where do we even begin?
Well, the first step is simply becoming more mindful.
Okay.
Start paying attention to people's postures, their hand gestures, their facial expressions. Don't try to overanalyze everything. Just observe and notice those patterns.
So, next time I'm in a meeting, I should be, looking for those evaluation signals you mentioned.
Yeah.
See who's tilting their head, who's stroking their chin, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And pay attention to how those cues change throughout the conversation. Does someone's posture shift when a certain topic comes up?
Right.
Do their facial expressions betray their true feelings, even if their words are saying something else?
It's almost like becoming a detective looking for those subtle clues
Yeah.
that reveal what's really going on beneath the surface.
Precisely. And it's not just about observing others.
Right.
Pay attention to your own nonverbal communication, too. Okay.
Are you sending the messages you intend to send?
Oh, that's a good point. I know I have a tendency to fidget when I'm nervous, which probably makes me seem less confident than I actually am.
Well, now that you're aware of that habit,
Right.
you can start to manage it.
Okay.
Maybe try taking some deep breaths, focusing on maintaining a steady posture, or even channeling that nervous energy into something more productive, like taking notes.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's not about trying to be someone you're not.
Right.
It's about becoming more self-aware and using that awareness to communicate more authentically and effectively.
Absolutely. And the more you practice observing and interpreting nonverbal cues, the more intuitive it will become.
Yeah.
It's like learning any new skill. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about this hidden language that we all speak but rarely think about.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
And I have to say, I'm a little bit excited to start putting this knowledge into practice.
Me too. It's like we've unlocked this whole new dimension of understanding human behavior.
And the best part is, it's something we can all continue to explore and learn from throughout our lives.
Absolutely.
There's always more to discover about this fascinating world of nonverbal communication.
So to our listener, keep those eyes peeled and your minds open.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you start to notice.
Happy observing, and until next time, keep diving deep.